welcome. Fernanda, do you want to put on the
Screen?
yes, the slideshow?
Yeah.
Thank you. So you're in for a treat today. Hilda Gann, Talent Talks for Small Businesses. Today's episode is hybrid work environment. Get ready now. And I have guests today, Gay Hamilton and Lisa Fulford Roy, and I'll introduce them shortly. Next slide. We started in 2020, we started doing webinars to help small businesses and HR professionals understand some of the concerns that they were going to be experienced with regards to the pandemic and the employees. Season one ended with 30 episodes. And if you're interested in some of the topics, do go to our knowledge vault in our company's website. We started season two in March and we're on episode 4 today. This was to really help small business owners, entrepreneurs with the HR expertise and strategies that they need to really harness and develop their staff and their company. So if you like us, tag us at PeopleBright or at hashtag TTSB 2021. I would like to acknowledge that the East Gwillimbury Chamber of Commerce has been our sponsor since last June, and Lauren Davies is the CEO there. She will join us later, and I will ask her to share thanks at the end of the presentation today. So let's get started. Our focus today is really to talk about 3 key areas to creating a hybrid work environment. And you need to consider the IT aspects, the space issues, and the HR. So those are the 3 key areas. We want to help you think about what you need to do to plan the hybrid work environment. Third, we want to give you tips and strategies on how to create a positive hybrid work experience. And between Gay, myself, and Lisa will be sharing those tips and strategies throughout our session. And lastly, we want to make it open and give you an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll share our perspectives with regards to that. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please use the chat line to identify your kind of your own experiences so that others who are here today can hear some of the other examples. When we started, just before we started, we asked people what their experience was with hybrid situations. So somebody shared that 16 years ago, they started it reluctantly, but people really embraced it and found it helpful. And then a couple of others came forward with their experiences today. It's nice to see some familiar faces, and I think Lisa probably sees some familiar faces in Gay. So thank you for joining us. I think you're in for a treat. So let's get to going, and I want to share with you my guests for the day. So first, we have Lisa Fulford Roy. She is the Senior Vice President for Client Strategy of CBRE, the real estate company in Canada. Lisa has over 25 years of experience in workplace strategy and design, and she collaborates with clients to really develop innovative business-aligned workplace solutions aligned to your specific businesses. She takes an integrative approach that is employee-centric and business-focused to achieve holistic client solutions. She's developed a strategy that's effective, that right-sizes occupancy, elevates the employee experience, and drives improved business results. So you're in for a treat to hear her perspective. Then I've got Gay Hamilton. Gay Hamilton is the CEO of Go Innovation. She's a business and technology professional with diverse and complex international experience in digital innovation, information technology, operations, and supply chain management, both in Canada, in the US, and in Ireland. She's currently the CEO of Go Innovation, with a side hustle as the EVP of Sales and Operations for cybersecurity auditors. She works with companies to assess their technology needs with a goal of reducing costs, adding stability to their environment, and increasing security by ensuring phenomenal technology solutions. She's a great networker and integrator, helping people with their IT solutions. And then there's me. So I am the president and chief people officer of People Bright Consulting. I come with 25 years of HR experience, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm very proud that I've created a concept called Connect with RevUp, and it really helps managers, business owners with their people management skills. Something that if you take take more interest in your people management skills, it can escalate how you manage your company, how you lead and motivate people. I really am passionate about healthy workplaces. And being a serial entrepreneur, my husband and I had our own engineering company, and we were recognized as one of the best workplaces in Canada, top 10 twice. So I'm really interested in helping you build a better culture during this time as we're kind of shifting from working in offices before to remote and now thinking about this hybrid solution. I host my own podcast show called Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda. And this is about guests who share with you their success stories, their struggles, and that journey along the way as entrepreneurs. So I want to start by just setting the tone of where we are today. Think about it, depending what part of the country you are, next slide, where were you when COVID hit? Some it was like January and before. In Canada, it was in March. And it wasn't just one place, it was global. So there was a global health crisis. And they even predicted it would be 18 to 24 months. Who would ever believe them? I certainly didn't believe them. But it has lasted so long. And what it's created is social unrest. There's this heightened awareness. And during this time, we've had introductions of more sensitivity to diversity, inclusion, the Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement. All of this social unrest has also happened during this time. And then as a result of the global health crisis and our reaction to it, a global economic downturn. So all of this has resulted in sustained uncertainty, unrest, and instability. And people are having ups and downs along the way in terms of their reaction to it. So next slide. So this impacted from a workplace perspective has really impacted on us as employees and our well-being. Mental health being that number one concern. The WHO predicted it would be the number one illness in 2020 and probably also will be in 2021. It has introduced this concept of remote work and now hybrid work. And it's been long standing. It's been 15 months plus. And this sustained stress now is a chronic stress. And the result of that is really even more stress on people's mental health. And the third concept is the employer experience. We talk about customer experience, but now we need to think about employee experience and employee experience as an entrepreneur, as a business. And how are we going to motivate and retain people post-COVID? So today we really want to talk about what does that mean for the hybrid work environment. Lisa's got a ton of interesting statistics and some ideas. So I'm going to ask Lisa now to share.
Thank you, Hilda. I think we can go to the next slide, but we're really going to be talking about the future of work as it relates to hybrid today. And certainly the pandemic has accelerated different operating and different occupancy models that pre-existed before the pandemic. But we're seeing this acceleration towards different ways of working as a result of the pandemic. And so some of the considerations that we think are going to be at the forefront of most organizations' decision-making is the fluid workforce. So what does that mean? It's really meaning for many organizations, it's the end of a fixed address and a fixed seat in the office. But that freedom also provides great autonomy and choice for employees. So the positive trade-off of not having a fixed address is that ability for flexibility to work remotely, but also flexibility to access other areas of the workplace. The second one is augmented work processes. So for those organizations who weren't working digitally and didn't have digital workflows before the pandemic, they certainly really struggled at the beginning when everybody started working remotely. But most have caught up and really focused on how to integrate technology, digital workflows in their everyday experience in order to survive and continue to be productive throughout the pandemic. So we think that movement towards technology as an enabler for workflow in the future is going to continue to be important and accelerate. The third one is well-being. Certainly, we thought about well-being prior to the pandemic as having perhaps a fitness space in the office, walkable spaces. We heard about walking meetings, but well-being post-pandemic has a different focus. It's quality of building, quality of HVAC, touchless technologies in spaces, automated settings for elevators. So we're thinking about well-being in terms of a reaction to the pandemic, in addition to all of the focus around well-being prior to the pandemic. The fourth one here is hotelification. Certainly with a fluid workforce and all of this activity and motion of remote work, hybrid work, work in the office, and heightened collaboration in the office, how we operate that and how we create a seamless and exciting experience for employees is going to be really important. And I'll speak a little bit more to that on a future slide. And then on-demand real estate. So what is our demand? What is our supply? And how do we right size what we think the office needs to be in the future with a combination of remote work frequency? So we may have part of the population working remote 4 days, part of the population working remote 2 days. And how do we really think about the demand on real estate? And the key is really building in that flexibility. So if we go to the next slide. So what does that mean in terms of space? What does the dynamic change to space if we think about a hybrid way of working? Well, the key really is to think about what are people going to do when they're in the office? And we know from activity-based work programs and other hybrid programs prior to the pandemic that how employees organize their time changes. So they're going to focus most of their individual work, focus work at home. And when they're in the office, there's going to be increased demand on collaboration, connection, community, as you can see from the stats here. So what does that do in terms of space? It means that there's going to be less demand for that desk or that office when people are in, and there's going to be a lot more demand for collaboration space. So these three models start to respond to this hybrid way of working. Activity-based work being probably the most prominent one for most organizations, but certainly for larger firms, having a team-based work environment within their portfolio, or having an event-based hub within their portfolio. So teams can come together, they can work in team zones, there's sufficient collaboration. So those are some key shifts in the landscape of the workplace that we are anticipating is going to increase and is going to be high in demand. If we go to the next slide. And in terms of our global research team and the surveys that we've been doing, it might be helpful for you to know where the majority are falling. And so the majority are really looking at a true hybrid model of 2.5 days in, 2.5 days remote. So 2 to 3 days remote was the most prominent survey result. And that was against 146 million square feet and 44 global companies. So, it's a sizable data set to understand that that's where the majority are falling. Depending on the business, some are below that. Some are actually looking at remote work as an enabler to perhaps cut operational costs, but still provide that flexibility and provide a great experience when people do come in. So based on that equal mix being a predominant result globally, we really do think there are going to be significant shifts in the physical space and how it supports these teams and new ways of working. We go to the next slide. And then in terms of leaders and employees, have there been different experiences or different perspectives? Certainly before the pandemic, there was always a reluctance by leaders to perhaps really trust that productivity would be the same. But when we did these survey results, you can see that there's not a significant gap between what individual contributors are saying about productivity and what leaders are saying. So that's the good news story for those that are considering hybrid work and flexible work arrangements. And if we go to the next slide, and then in terms of culture, and this is a big one because it's about team and culture and connection, and how do we have these serendipitous moments? How do we grow our network within our organization? Culture is a big driver around engagement and productivity within organizations. And certainly during the pandemic, that's been a real challenge. 57% said team culture was really challenging during the pandemic. 30% said team engagement was challenging, and 31% said managing performance was challenging. So we know that that's probably going to be the key lens that organizations are going to need to focus on in sustaining a hybrid work model. Right now, we're fully remote, which is really difficult. Fully in office is probably not going to be attainable for most organizations because employees do want some form of flexibility. But then how do we focus attention around making sure that culture is critically thought through and supported with mixed presence? How is team engagement supported based on those planning models I showed you? How do we really invest in those team spaces? And then how do HR professionals start to think about managing performance and putting together a way to measure performance that's going to be manageable for leaders and managers within our organizations? If we go to the next slide. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Hilda.
So that's a great segue into human resources aspect. I love the slides that you had, so I thought it was important for you to go first to really set the tone. The challenge is moving from a remote workplace to a hybrid. And as some of the people came forward before we started, some have already started a hybrid model. And I remind you that do share some things in the chat line. Do put your questions in there. If you want them to be anonymous, you could send your questions to Fernanda or Diane, Matthew, who are our production team today and guiding us through the chat section. So I really want to focus on the HR aspects of this right now. And as I said earlier, post-pandemic, the people aspects, there's been uncertainty for 15 months. People have been going highs and lows in terms of their mental wellness. And there's two schools of thought. In the Hayes report, which I've quoted before in my webinars, is 50% of people are thinking of leaving their companies where they feel a disconnect, where they felt the company didn't really treat them well during this very stressful time. The other thing to take into consideration is because a lot of people were working remotely at home, they started to think about, so what do I really want to do? Or I'm loving this remote work. Should I continue doing something like this? So people have had an opportunity to explore who they are, what they want to be, and finding that right fit. So right now, people are in a position where they're thinking of moving on. And I've already started to see that happen. A lot of people are already starting to make that shift as they're starting to feel more comfortable. So this is a great threat. This is a great threat to organizations as they move forward out of pandemic. So next slide. So what does that mean? So as Lisa said, people are looking for a hybrid. You're not going to get totally remote. We're not going to get fully back in-house. The opportunities to go hybrid are being considered more and more. So just to reinforce what Lisa said, I think from a human pers- resources perspective, look at the people and think about what they are doing. Work that's done independently, remote can be done remotely at home. I don't need to come into the office to show you things that I'm doing, that I can do more productively and more conveniently at home. And then is the work that requires collaboration? Zoom meetings are okay, but they're not the same. I remember sitting in a meeting And there's something about physically being there. You sense the energy, you see people's reactions, and you can see it better than on a Zoom meeting, like a Zoom screen, because everybody's looking somewhere else other than the camera. So where there's collaboration required and it's beneficial to have it in a physical sense, then that's where you might think about how do we position our work office space or location for that kind of thing. Which teams are there, which is reliable, and we'll talk more about that later, but I want to plant that idea. And then what are time sensitive communications, where we got to deliver this tomorrow, all hands on deck, let's all come into the office, something like that. Then the next thing I want to talk about, next slide, is then what does that mean? What are the considerations of that as we're thinking about the hybrid work model? So think about the work culture, which Lisa had mentioned, 47% work culture is really important. And that's the camaraderie, that's the thinking of being inclusive, the diversity, equality, but the inclusivity. Look at the employee experience, because employees want to have a meaningful relationship. So when they come into the office, that's when you really want to have that connection with them. And to me, employee experience not just means employees in the office. It's how do you foster their professional growth? How do you retain them? And I'll just comment on my Rev Up approach. My Rev Up approach talks about thinking about people to build a trusting, inclusive relationship. And Rev Up stands for treat people with respect, look at them as equals, value who they are, and then look at the uniqueness of them and tap into that potential to promote their professional growth in areas where they're strong and can be stronger with the right kind of support and attitude. And then the other key part of this consideration is health and wellness, accommodating people, thinking about the safety, thinking about whether they're working in a situation where they're single, and being remotely working gives them isolation and mental health stresses that way. Yet there's all those that have families and they have mental health stresses that they're trying to balance, work, family responsibilities, and then the whole idea of safety. With vaccinations, it'll be less, but then there are some people who may not want to vaccinate, and this is the whole conundrum. So some considerations that you should be thinking about as you're trying to build a remote, um, a a hybrid workspace where people come to work and it's going to be a good employee experience. So the last point I want to make is the role of the manager. They are key. And during this pandemic, they probably have not felt as comfortable. Whatever skills they had in terms of people management may have been okay pre COVID, but maybe not even okay. And during COVID, when they needed to be more connected with their people, needing to develop a trusting relationship, they may not have had the skill sets. And the three things that I think are important for a manager is number one, create trust versus control. And I think some people are starting to get that, but still some people feel they need to control by the questions they ask me. So how do I do this without micromanaging them, which means they were in a control situation? The second thing is uplift. As managers, we have the power to help people by uplifting them. And uplifting means there's two things. You can build your team's skills and the team's confidence. That's your role. By increasing and supporting their skills, you build their confidence. By building their confidence, you help build their skills. The opposite's true too. By eroding their confidence, their skill levels actually get worse. And so we as managers should think about our roles as uplifting people. And the last thing is addressing employee morale and retention concerns and helping them with autonomy and really feeling connected. Managers play a role. And I really support the idea of helping managers get the people management skills that they need. So I think now it's Kay's turn. Oh, I do have one more quick slide. So key, I thought The key elements are you
Sorry.
need to set the policies and practices. You need to optimize this hybrid model, include employees in planning the solution because they have perspectives that you may not be thinking about. So including them will lead to a better outcome. Train the managers, which I mentioned, and then make sure you communicate the model. So Gay, your turn.
Thanks, Elder. And this slide is one of my favorites, that building on the building kind of thing. And flexibility, and go to the next slide. Flexibility and security are the two most commonly used words, I think, in 2020, if we're to look back in future times. And they're probably equally opposing. They're worlds apart from each other. It is possible, though. It is possible to build security into your IT infrastructure, your network, and still remain flexible. The key is, as Hilda just mentioned, is communication. It's being allowed into the conversation. So we need IT into the conversation along with all of the employees and all the different groups and all the different players that are part of trying to make this hybrid solution really, really positive. Next slide, please. So, hybrid workspaces, yes, there's a tremendous impact on the employees and so many things are going to be different. There's also that same list of things that are going to change impacts our IT infrastructure as well. So while we're trying to workspaces versus workstations, there's a lot of technology that goes in the background to support that whole thing. And again, with that open communication and people communicating back and forth with what's required, what does it look like, what are we really trying to get to, we can come up with some really, really innovative solutions that are really going to make it work and really make it much more convenient and positive for everybody that's involved in the group. Next slide. So as I said, flexibility and security is kind of the name of this game, but it's not just data. So generally, when we think about security, we think about securing the network, making sure that the data is safe and we're not being hacked, we're not experiencing ransomware attacks, that sort of thing. There's also the security in keeping the employees comfortable as they return back to the office. So there is return to work software that you can buy, you can build your own custom, but it helps ease the employees back into a busy workspace with what are the protocols and how does everybody see them and how are they updated and how are they communicated. They're all communicated in one place, which is really, really important. The trying to unify the communication. So try and deal with all the different kinds of conferencing systems that are available, shared file systems, how does that all work? A reservation system to talk about the workstations, where will people be working in workspaces, that sort of thing. There's a number of activities there and a number of different solutions that IT can provide. IT asset management is kind of an interesting one. It's been around since computers started, basically, and what it means is tracking all of the assets, anything that connects into your network. And by tracking those, you lock down the security and you make sure that everything's safe. So that is where we're really going to see that the flexibility come from, as long as the assets are managed properly and effectively, then we can allow a lot more flexibility than we otherwise would have. Internet performance, I just sort of wanted to mention this as just kind of food for thought, is as we have the workforces coming back into offices, the impact on the capacity of the internet is something that really needs to be closely looked at, because of the amount of video conferencing that's going to go on, because the world has changed so much since we left the offices 15 months ago. It's just kind of a heads up that, obviously there's a lot we can do with internet performance if we know about it. It's the communication thing that's really key. Next slide. And so when we think about security, I think probably the biggest thing that we think about is, how do we protect our network? How do we make sure that network is safe and we're not gonna have some kind of a breach? And really, at the end of the day, it does come down to everyone. There's statistics that show how many times a hacker is successful because of a user interface, a user connectivity, someplace somebody clicked a link in an email, that sort of thing. It's up to everybody to make sure that we're going to be safe. So absolutely, I mean, updating cybersecurity, pardon me, policies, limiting access to the corporate data. If you don't need access, you don't get access, and tighten things down from that perspective. There are audits that are available. So you can audit your infrastructure to find out, are we on the right path? We may be in really good shape. And wouldn't it be great to know that, as opposed to worrying about it, not knowing, or worse yet, finding out that you really weren't in very good shape when you thought you were, and then and then you're dealing with some kind of a disaster in your hands. So all of those things kind of add together to the security and how we can keep it rolling as we go along. Next slide. So as I say, like, we're all being inundated with facts and figures and percentages these days. These are just a couple that were interesting to me. Since COVID-19, the FBI has reported 300% increase in reported cyber crimes. And that's interesting to know, because not everybody reports a cyber crime, even when it's been successful. They're embarrassed. They don't want to have to, tell the world about it, that kind of thing. They keep it to themselves. But imagine, so 15 months ago, if there was one attack a day, there's now 300 attacks a day. And actually, it's more like there's an attack every 10 or 15 seconds on your network. So the good news that comes out of this, though, is that not everybody is being hacked. Not everybody is having ransomware attacks and that kind of stuff. It's not that they're not being hit, it's that they're not being successfully challenged. So they've done the work, they've put things in place, they're following the procedures, and they're really towing the line and really keeping things safe and secure. So this last slide was just fun. I couldn't resist this. So this was a Bloomberg, just a little video clip that I saw the other day. These are actually workstations. These are workspaces that each individual has, and you drive them around. So there is a video online if you're interested in seeing it. It's pretty funny, but yeah, so you take all your technology with you when you go to meetings and get-togethers.
Thank you, Gay. What we want to do now is kind of have a discussion. If you're interested in contacting us, you can take a snapshot of this and you can have our email address. One person did ask a question about what is return to work software. So for those that would like to know a bit more, can you explain what that is, Gay?
Absolutely. So it can encompass a lot of things, but part of it would be making a reservation for a workspace in the office. So if you're going in the next day, you can reserve your spot rather than show up and find out everybody else is in the office that day and there's nothing available. There's a really great feature in it which provides access for your guests. So you send a link to a guest, the guest goes in and registers, understands your office protocols. In other words, our company is insisting on you wear a mask when you're in the office. We will be doing social distancing, all that kind of stuff. So all of that is put into place. Anything that they need to bring with them, or any questions that they have, can all be handled by the software in advance of them coming in, as well as the employees. It's a great spot for employees to see, the protocols have changed, or there's an event going on at certain times and the protocol will be different for that event. That type of thing can all be included in this return to work software.
Thank you. Okay, we can probably stop the screen share right now, and we'll start by asking the first question, and we'll all just jump in, Lisa, myself, and Gay. But what do you see as the biggest challenges for managers and businesses with a return to work that has this hybrid model?
I could start. Certainly, I think for managers, particularly to your point, Hilda, if they didn't have really strong management and interpersonal skills before, they've been challenged throughout the pandemic. I think that managers are going to need to be successful in managing mixed presence teams, because they're not the entire team won't be in all the time. So how do they do that? And how do they do that in a way that's really inclusive, so that you don't have some team members who feel overlooked if they're remote, and other team members who feel that they're getting greater opportunities by being in. And so I think managers are really going to have to navigate that team culture and inclusivity very carefully. I also think that they're going to, and this is happening right now with HR professionals and leaders within the organization, is how do we start to think differently about performance management? And how do we do that equitably and consistently across our organization now that we're going to have this mixed presence? So those would be my top two. And I guess there is a third one as I'm thinking out loud here, is that, how do I find my tribe? How do I locate my team when we are in the office? And how do we create an operational structure so we can find each other and still have really high connectivity when we are in? So those would be the three. Gay, do you have some comments in that regard?
Yeah, I think my comments are sort of along the same lines. And I think too, a lot of it comes back to the flexibility. There's a lot of communication that needs to change. We need to be much more communicative. The information has to go throughout the entire community. It can't be held in silos as we found in the past. So one group may have a great solution and another group desperately needs it, and without that communication, it's not going to happen, and it's not going to be successful. And obviously, by including IT in those discussions in the early days, they can plan for what it is that the business wants, what the business needs to see, and get ahead of that and get ahead of the ball. Yeah.
Like, I would concur that managers are that key, and that's sort of why I put that in my presentation. They are the glue, and it's going to be hard because sometimes everybody's not going to be working together in the office the same days because there's going to be so many permutations and combinations. And it's I think the key is really creating trust, learning about your individual employees, some bites at a time. And the more you know about them, the more you treat them as people that you're going to help them develop and grow. And they're going to build a relationship that's going to be based on trust and loyalty, and it'll be healthier than if you're micromanaging people. I think the other thing is the biggest challenge too is creating that environment that's going to be enticing to come back to. Like, I don't I can appreciate that being in your own space, with your pictures on the wall and everything, is going to be a thing of the past. And people are going to have to get used to that possibility of change, is that I don't have a place that I can hang up and call my own. Some people may, maybe at the leadership level they may, but in the technical space, in the admin space areas, there'll probably be more, find a spot, use that return to work software. Hopefully you get the spot that you want on that day. But I think that's it's trying to create that workspace that's going to be interesting for the employees. It's going to be supervising in a way that is more coaching, mentoring, developing. You still have to get the work done, but you got to uplift those people, as I said earlier. Any other thoughts, though, Lisa, from that space issue?
Yeah,
Some creative ideas for these people who are saying, well, what do I do? How do I make this change?
yeah, and I mean, technology is definitely an enabler in all of this, particularly with mixed presence being going to be in demand in any room that you're in, because there may always be somebody who's virtual. And how do you enable technology to make sure that that's an equal playing field going forward forevermore? But the other item I wanted to touch on, and you've touched on it here, is how do I find my people? How to have a sense of arrival and departure? How do I connect with my peers that I work with the most when I'm in? And so one of the concepts of activity-based planning is also continuing to hold and create neighborhoods where teams have a sense of arrival and a departure based on where their personal file drawer is or where their locker is. And so these team zones may have softer boundaries, people can flow in and out of them, but there can still be a sense of community and a sense of a connection for those teams. But also looking at team zones a little differently too. They're not just team zones with desks. They might be team zones where we come in for a half day or 2-day session, and we're working together in an area that has individual work settings as well as team settings. And so thinking about those zones in a way that really supports people in doing the work they need to do when they're in, but making it comfortable, and personalizing it in a team neighborhood, for example, where you could have communication around what the team's working on, employee of the month, a communication on upcoming events, so that it still feels really personalized and not institutional when people are in. And, we think about, even pre-pandemic, we were thinking about the magnetic office from a talent and attraction and retention perspective. And that's going to be ever more important, because employees aren't going to want to make the commute if the experience is flat when they get there, or if it's clunky because they can't find a desk or can't reserve a meeting room,
Yeah.
or the spaces they need just don't exist. And so being really thoughtful about how we rethink the makeup and the kit of parts in the office and making that seamless and accessible is going to be really, really important.
It's fine when it's a small office and there's 10 people, but when you have a large footprint, it's coordinating. I remember when we were preparing for today's session, I think you hit upon something that I didn't even think about, Lisa, and it's teams aren't just your immediate team. Like, so if it's just HR, or if it's just the engineering working on a transportation project, teams can be collaborative teams, naturally collaborative. So maybe there's a time when IT, HR, and accounting seem to need to get together on a particular thing. So I think it behooves companies, HR leaders, and businesses to think about the logistics of really opening space and looking at the space utilization from so I think that one of your diagrams showed at the end more communal space, more open spaces where people are collaborating. And that's what I was trying to get at, is people don't need to come to work just to work independently at the office. They can do a much more productive job of working remotely from home, whereas they can't collaboratively work remotely from home and zoom in as effectively as coming in. So there needs to be some logistics thought around that. Gay, do you have anything else on the, the subject of managers
Yeah, it's
and
again, it's
businesses?
yeah, it's the flexibility that we're requiring of everyone on so many different levels and so many different topics, different approaches. Training is going to be a big part of this. Knowledge and stopping to think about it and touching base with the employees, touching base with um, providers of solutions. I think it's a great time to reach out to anybody in your network that's doing the same kind of thing. Let's not reinvent the wheel, every single time. There's lots of solutions out there. It's a matter of trying to find the right ones that are going to fit with your environment and culture and make it work.
So I know there's questions, there's a hand raised. We are going to hold those to the end. We are dedicating the last 15 minutes to open questions, and we'll take them as they've come. Our next co- uh, thought was, what would be the biggest challenges of employees? I know I saw one question. What if you want them to come in 4 days a week? How are you going to manage people who don't want to come in?
Yeah.
That's a challenge for sure.
Well,
And
there's
that's an HR challenge as far as I'm concerned,
Thanks,
Hilda. That's
thanks.
that's on you. We can have the IT do whatever you want it to do, but I can't make the people come in.
there's certainly a lot of debate right now over how do we welcome and encourage people to come in, because it's going to be such a great experience, and you're going to have all of the spaces that you need and want, and you're going to be able to find a space if you plan to be in ahead, versus mandating people to come in. But at the same time, it's really important to survey employees and understand their individual perspective,
Mhm.
because it's all over the map right now, depending on stage of life, home conditions, length of commute. So they may be on the same team as someone else, but they may have a very different perspective with remote work flexibility for them. And so getting accurate information doesn't mean that the business doesn't make a decision on what remote work policies look like, but understanding demand in office and employee sentiment is a big piece of this. So it's really about how do we strike the balance of um, really fostering a great experience for employees and listening to the flexibility that they think they want, but how do we still focus on the business priorities around connection, connectivity? It might be innovation, like face to face collaboration to get a product out. Um, and how do we balance those two? And then a third piece of that, which is also related to employees and creating that vibrant, engaging experience, is making sure we don't cut out too much space and we don't have too much held vacancy. So there's the balance of how much contingency do we keep in our portfolio, in our office footprint for that flexibility, but how much do we get rid of or repurpose in order to make sure that those collaborative spaces are available when people need them. So understanding demand and supply, I think is going to be really, really important to maintain one, the productivity and the engagement that the businesses are looking for. So that connectivity is so critical for the employees.
And I know there's a cost factor associated with that. I know that some companies have actually, when their leases were renewed, made the decision to no longer, to basically give up that space and then figure out what they're going to do. So there's a cost factor if you're going to renovate. There's a cost factor if you decide you're not going to lease and have less space. So there's a lot of structural things. There's a lot of organizations, and there's the human resources aspect. I think, yes, like I think when people started working remotely, we kind of winged it and we wrote mini policies, or which were probably just email statements. And this is the way of the future. So if you haven't started to formalize and write policies, then you need to do that. So people, there's clear expectations that people can read about. But I do think we are at a time of flexibility. So if it becomes the 2-3-3-2 rule, there has to be allowance for accommodation, for some fluidity. And that may be, hey, can I do 4-1 for the next, 2 months because of ABC, my children, needs to get settled into school, and then I'll go 2-3 afterwards. And you can't coerce people, but you can set expectations. So I think I saw a question just pop up saying, well, what if you decide to go to the 4-1 rule? What do you do then? Question whether the 4-1 rule is the right thing for the business and the risk of losing employees for that business. So it isn't static. It's what's the best thing that you can do for the company, keeping in mind the clients you serve, the projects you do, and the employees that you need to retain. And that risk balance is something that you'll have to do. Edicting people to do something is going to really not be wise for that employee experience. And as a result of that, you may find that your retention, like your turnover, goes sky high. Can you afford 25% of your employees to turn over in the next year because you didn't listen and think about the employee experience? So as much as you edicted a 4-1 rule where people have to be in here 4 days a week, that could result in a terrible, terrible turnover for you. So think of those things. Any thoughts, Gay?
Well, no, I think it's interesting to try and imagine what these solutions are going to look like. And it's such a tough balance between offering options to the employees, and yet there's still that whole productivity piece that comes into play as well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It is a
it's
business. At the end of the day, it's a business you have to run.
Yeah, there's a bottom line to be
Yep.
concerned with. And it's interesting. There's some of the statistics that I saw fairly recently about the graduates that are coming out of university in 2020 and 2021. More than 90% of them want to work in a business full time. That, you know, they've had a huge impact in their lives and the timing of their life. So, you know, there's so many things to take into account, you know, the type of business, the number of people that are there, and so
There's a
on.
thumbs
So
up on that one.
yeah.
So what we're touching on is kind of life stages, really. So if I'm new in my
Mm,
career or new in a particular company, I'm going to want to network. I'm going to want to meet everybody. I'm going to want to build trust. I'm going to want to be mentored and mentor. And so depending on stage of career and stage in life, I think forevermore there's going to be this variability. And so we talked about flexibility a few times, but flexibility to grow and contract, and possibly even flexibility in learning once we're all back to some kind of a hybrid model, learning from that, gathering the data, understanding where team dynamics are good, what's working and what's not, and then refining, those policies or behavioral suggestions or etiquette
yeah, yeah.
suggestions, because I don't think it's one and done. I think we're going to learn a lot once our offices start to open and we can start to understand what that hybrid reaction is and
And
how that's going to flex over time.
and I think that that's a good lead to the question that we're going to talk about next is what do you see as the future of the hybrid work model? What are you envisioning? What are you hearing out there?
Well, and it's interesting. I think, Lisa, you talked about this a while ago with a client that you worked with that a number of years ago had gone a hybrid office model and, you know, putting things in place. And that's just the norm for that company. And it's been around, you know, a fair bit of time. Um, is there an experience there that you can work from, that things that they've learned, things that didn't work, things that were really successful? Is that possible to build on?
Yeah, I think there's the physical space, which needs to be seamless, and it really needs to um, have all the settings that we think we're going to need, not just a desk or an office and a meeting room. There are a lot of other settings that can really support teams in doing their work. But I think a lot of the learning is measuring that productivity and understanding where different teams need different things.
Mhm.
Not all, it's not a one size fits all.
Yep.
And if we create a physical environment and a technology solution, as much as we want to get to some level of universality, so everything's familiar, we're all having the same experience, being really mindful of nuances in the business or nuances in a particular function or in a particular team needs to be done so that they have what they need in order to perform. Because when we see one solution applied to everybody, there's definitely an area of the business or a particular skill set that isn't met. Their needs aren't met in the process. So um, the other thing with future hybrid working um, that I think is going to be really, really important is teams self-assessing themselves. What works for our team and being able to communicate that and come up with a team structure where there's buy-in and inclusivity and not necessarily a manager dictating, as you've mentioned, Hilda, but not necessarily the business dictating that either. So just being
Yeah.
open and
Yeah.
flexible for team individuals now have a voice on everything because we're all in this together and thinking about our individual perspective. But I think the biggest area for change is the team dynamic component and how to make that compelling.
I think if anything, COVID-19 has taught us as people to be more flexible, to be more resilient, and to adapt to change a lot better than we were, 2 years ago. So I think we've all learned a little bit more to be giving. And I love how you talk about one size doesn't fit all and it's stages. So as much as I see that a hybrid model is a good model for companies where you do work office and or at home. Obviously, retail, restaurants, it's a different kind of a situation. But for office workers, I think the hybrid model is the right choice. But I think each company needs to find what is the right fit. And within that company, it's not a one size, like everybody is 2 to 3, because I agree with Fernanda who had the big hand raise. When you're learning, you want to there she shows her face. When you're learning, you want to be there. You want to be able to see somebody pass by and ask them a question. When we actually had remote work from home when we had our company iTrans, but we did it only for managers because and then we expanded it to people once they know what they're doing and can work independently at home. That's great. But we thought about the young engineer who, like, how do they know what they need to know and what they need to do? And so we did say that they were not going to be part of a remote work situation until they became more comfortable. So I think you're right. Some people want to come to work for various reasons. A new grad who's learning, a person who really needs a little bit of socialization because they only live in an apartment that was 30 floors up with only a window. That isolation was like hard. With COVID, post COVID, it'll be different. But allow people to say, can I work 4 days in the office even though it's a 2-3 rule? And if it makes sense, fine. I think that's the one thing that I think the hybrid model is here to stay. And I would love to see businesses think about how to use space creatively. And I think those that do want to work remotely, make those opportunities an employee experience about collaboration, about building and fostering the work culture, because I think that's still going to be a key. And I think the other key is the manager. The manager always had the power to make or break the culture of their team. And more so post COVID, they are still a key. And I encourage them to self learn how to be better at their people management skills or get training on people management skills. It'll make such a difference to the lives of your team and the lives of the company, the livelihood of the company. So we've got about 1 minute before we move into the open questions, because I think that's important too. But just a quick comment then. What do you see as some of the strategies that will help encourage candidates to come and employees to stay?
I think a lot of it has to do with positive work experience, that openness, that flexibility, that willing to put it together so that it's working for the individual teams, and to offer that flex to individual employees, which is a difficult thing to manage. And again, another great opportunity for software to jump in and help out with that. But I think that we've gotten into a world of choice, and people are more open to being part of the decision-making process, and figuring out what works for them. And Lisa, as you said, like different stages of life work differently with people as well.
Yeah, I think it's all about the experience, and there's so many components to that. It's a positive technology experience, no matter where I work. It's the the ability to reserve ahead and make sure my commute's worthwhile, and the ability to access spaces and have inclusive meetings face to face with mixed use. Um, I do think people are clamoring to get into the office because we're all craving the serendipity of a conversation versus a booking of a Zoom call, and that face-to-face connection with our teams. So I think that was the driver before. It was about engagement, working with each other, those casual collisions, the water cooler chat. How do we make sure those continue to happen and are really prioritized in the way the workplace is redesigned or adapted, because not everybody has the budget to redesign it completely. But if you're going to convert some space, convert it for those social, communal, team-oriented spaces to make that an engaging experience. And certainly, I think that most people will do the commute 1 or 2 days a week so they can get access to team and get access to that energy that you talked about, Hilda, that heightened sense of engagement when you can see a 360 view of the individuals you're talking to versus a 2D a 2D view that we have today. It's picking up on that energy, and we know that highly engaged workforces have a higher rate of productivity. They're rated higher in terms of their overall measurement, in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 lists, and there's better health and well-being in terms of mental health and inclusion. And so supporting our employees to come back, have a great experience, resolves a lot of the sort of business productivity and engagement issues that
Yeah.
perhaps are percolating right now because we've been at this so long. But
And I
that
think
are
those
also the concern.
And I think those companies that recognize investing in your people really has that return. Fortune, 500 companies, those that invest in their people will see profits and sales 2 to 3 times fold their competitors who do not invest or recognize people as their greatest assets. And I've already commented on what I see as valuable. It's managers that are connecting with people and the work culture. These are important things that will keep people and retain people. I want to open it up to the questions that have been formulating, and the person who raised their hand. So Diane, can you kind of pop in some questions, or however you want to
I
guide
think,
us here?
yeah, I think now there's several of them that are speaking to a lot of what you just discussed around how do you communicate with people and getting them back and giving some changes. So for those that submitted those, let me know if you still have ongoing questions. I'm going to assume that maybe those have been addressed. There's one here that a couple of them actually talking about managers and what we need to do with managers. So there's the feeling that managers will continue to use the out of sight, out of mind mentality and promote those who report to the office on a regular basis. So if they're not seeing them and interacting with them in the usual way, that some of them may be perks, maybe promotion, maybe projects, those kinds of things. And someone else did comment that it's true that managers tend to promote those who are willing to show when they're needed, like they come to the plate, so to speak. So I'll throw that one out there.
Sure, maybe I can start talking on that. Strong managers build connections with people, whether they're physically there or whether they're at the other end of a Zoom call or a telephone. And so I encourage managers to look at people as people, and when they're assessing a project, look at the uniqueness and look at the strengths of who can do this job. Not, oh, I just saw Charlie walk by, let's grab him to do the job. It's really thoughtfully managing and fostering the growth of each individual as an individual. So how do you manage that? You've got to help managers be better managers, and that's understanding people, tapping in and motivating them. You're supposed to be the inspiration, you're supposed to be the person that uplifts. So helping them do that, I think, would be easier said than done, but we could coax them to say that that's an expectation, that they be better managers, especially when it comes to the people side.
And Arshad,
Lisa wants to say
sorry,
something.
did you want to add, Lisa? Sorry.
Just very briefly, that's where, when we talk about change management, this is going to need a lot of change management, and you have to start at the top because you need that leader and executive sponsor buy-in to hybrid working, and they may need additional supports in how they manage and how they lead to feel like this is possible and it's going to be great, and we're actually going to increase engagement versus decrease engagement. So to your point on the training, but I think that training comes with change management and setting expectations at all levels of the organization.
And I did want to just acknowledge Arshad. I know you had your hand up earlier, and I'm not sure if your question got answered. You can unmute yourself and just ask your question.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thanks that you remembered that I had raised my hands. The reason why I loaded down, because Hilda has partially answered it. My question was more related. I can understand the concept of office space on demand, which is very much the kind of a work I did with a lot of organizations like multinationals, the NCR or the IBMs. We all had project-oriented kind of work. So there was times that we were working on a site where we had no space of our own, and every day we used to go in some at the client space, work ourselves, and move back to our silos wherever we were living. So I understand all that, but my question is more related with the SMB industry who do not have enough funds to restructure their information technology. As Gay Hamilton mentioned, return to work software, they may not have so much funds to uh, use newer technologies where people can really collaborate remotely or in a hybrid environment. And then there are a lot of other legal implications, whether the employee doesn't want to come and the business requires the person need to come. All that is separate, but my basic question is that even though the employer and the employee both are trying to do good things, but financially it's not possible to maintain distance and to keep everybody secure from the health perspective and to follow the government bylaws. I mean, how to do that, especially for SMB.
What is S&D? Sorry.
So SMB,
Yes. Oh,
a small
small business. Okay.
a
Thank
small
you.
business.
Small business. Gotcha. I'm thinking, thank you. I didn't hear the M. Who wants to take that first?
Gay, do you want to speak to the technology and then I can maybe speak to spatial?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I do absolutely hear you on the cost of technology and trying to make updates and that sort of thing. Um, it does depend on the size of your workforce, where everybody's located. There are a lot of simple protocols that have to be followed. So for example, you're saying your office isn't big enough to provide the social distancing, then they wear masks. So there are those kind of alternatives that are available, certainly. And there is, and I would encourage you to jump online or shoot me an email perhaps. There are a lot of either free or very inexpensive solutions that are being created, that are coming out now all the time, that are specifically built to address these kinds of issues. So how do I get a survey to all my employees and figure out all the details on who wants to do what and where are we going to make this happen? How do we do, for example, the return to work software? Is that something that's important to your company? That kind of thing. There is a lot of software and solutions that are available at either very low cost or no cost. So I would encourage you to jump onto Google and you have a look around, but absolutely reach out to me, reach out to people that that are in like businesses. There's a lot of really great information available. Yeah.
Lisa?
I think with the physical space in this interim phase, while we're still in the pandemic, very few organizations are making physical changes. They're just physically distancing people and rotating them through the office. So they're kind of managing at almost no additional cost. Even simple gestures like having a green card on a desk that's been cleaned and a red card on a desk that needs to be cleaned, and sort of managing in a very low cost model. It could be a way to make employees feel safe and know how to navigate the space during this interim phase. Longer term, though, with hybrid work, there's a lot that can be done with what we call micro architecture. So through the purchase of furnishings to provide a variety of other work settings. And those can be amortized over a longer period because of the way you'd be investing in them. There's still a cost there, but that's sort of the least costly way of changing the physical space for the longer term. And certainly if you're between leases and you're going to need to move in 2 or 3 years, you can take those assets with you. So you don't have a sunk cost in your physical facility. And then with smaller businesses, a lot of them are considering not necessarily going to seat sharing because there's just not enough desks to really make that work, because you have to have enough supply in order for there to be enough contingency in there. But they might convert a few desks to collaboration areas or repurpose a storage room to get more collaboration, for example. So simple gestures around creating a different dynamic and putting a little bit of um, a fresh layer to a fresh lens to the workplace is what some of the smaller companies and mid-sized companies are doing.
Any other questions? I'll make a comment on two things. There was one comment about returning to work where people need to return 4 days a week. And I think I've answered that one, but again, some flexibility on that. The second one, it has to do with, well, why should I come back to work? Everything's been working fine remotely. I think you have to help those people understand the greater good of the business. For the good of the business, collaboration is key. Um, Working remotely, you tend to work for the work done. Working collaboratively gives synergies and new ideas to help move forward. We're no longer in a stasis mode. We are in a forward thinking mode. We want to build the business. The good of the business decides that we need to come back and collaborate as part of the balance. So what was working for you is you as an individual. What we want to do now is for the good of the company and the business and the health of the company. So we need you to come back and be part of the health of the company. So something like that, I hope, will inspire them to think, okay, I'm doing it for the company, right? Any other thoughts? We are coming close to the end. Fernanda, uh, would you bring up the last slides for us? And I'll also just entertain any last questions.
There was just
Yeah.
one last one,
Thank
which was about low performers. And if the feeling of the manager is the fact that it would be better to have them come into the office, how would you kind of have that conversation with them?
I mean, assuming that it is a remote and a hybrid situation, you would do it in person, but there should be no reason why you cannot have that discussion over the phone. The Zoom is face to face, essentially. So I would say that that should not be an inhibitor. Can we get the next slide? So we've had this open discussion. As you can see, the hybrid work model has so many moving parts to it. And I was, glad that Lisa and Gay could come on and share, because I think by the three of us sharing all those nuances, we hope that you've gotten food for thought about what you need to do to help transition your company, your staff, your managers as you move into a hybrid model, if that's what you accept. And again, no one size fits all. The next slide. We do continue to have our series. We did talk about the fact that performance management is important, and I will be doing a session on July 21st from 1 to 2 on the performance management future trends. It isn't about evaluating people and what they did anymore. It's about fostering growth. And Lisa says that's something we need to attend to. So I'll be doing that on July 21st. Next slide. Look out for the Eventbrite on that. As mentioned earlier, we have done 30 webinars in 2020, and we've done 4 to date this year as part of season 2. So feel free to go into the slides that you're going to get a copy of, or our knowledge vault, to really get a sense of some of the topics that we've covered over the course of the last year and a half. And then the next slide. I just again want to thank Lisa Fulford-Roy, Gay Hamilton for joining me and giving you insights to things that you should be thinking about, or thought, wow, there's more to it than just bringing them back to work. So we really hope that you've enjoyed it. If you want to contact any of us, we're happy to have a conversation with you. Take a snapshot of this or wait till the slides come through and reach out to us. So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody.
And Hilda, we want to thank Lauren and East
Yes.
Gwillimbury for their sponsorship.
Lauren, can you come forward? And I mentioned earlier before you arrived that you are a sponsor, and thank you for being a sponsor with us since June of
Hi.
last year.
Yes, yes. Hi, thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, we're really pleased to partner with People Bright and Hilda on this series. And I think we've been partners since June of last year. So it's been about a year that we've been doing this together. And I think a lot of these topics are really important for all businesses. So we're sharing it in our community, but also within the region as well. And thank you, Lisa and Gay, for your participation today. A lot of input, a lot of insight, and I think you guys are right. Communication is the key, and it's not one size fits all. And we have to think about our company, our employees, and our clients. So thank you very much for all the insight. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.